building in this country. And that's really what today's lecture is about. Today, however, is also a very special day. On this day, 30 years ago, how many of you can recall where you were and what you were doing? All right. Majority of you here would have been at a press conference in Soweto where the Rivonia trialists were doing their first press briefing after 30 years in jail. It is a huge honor for us to have Sello Mlangeni here representing his father who's not too well. Sello, welcome. Please give Tata Mlangeni our warmest wishes. I'm sure if he could, Dennis Goldberg would have been here as the two remaining Rivonia trialists. But I know Comrade Andrew would most definitely have been here had he been able to. We will share with you just some clips to refresh memory of 30 years ago and the first rally at FNB Stadium as well. But to welcome you here, we ask the board chairperson of the Kathrada Foundation, Comrade Derek, if you don't mind, there are some empty seats here, so I know with your stature you would only want to speak to a full house, but if you don't mind, if you won't mind doing the welcome, please. Derek Anakom.
I'll be sitting there comfortably. Good evening, everybody. I knew I was coming to a very, very important event as I was driving through Johannesburg because everyone was squeezing in front of everyone else and cutting people off. There are some people even driving on that lane that is designated for buses. So I knew there must be some very important event on that everybody was rushing to. Welcome. That's my job. I don't know. Sean has already welcomed you. I'm going to give you an extraordinary welcome and a very warm welcome on behalf of the board of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation to this 10th annual lecture of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. In the spirit of Uncle Kathy and the tradition of Uncle Kathy, you'll know that he wasn't that good at keeping up standards of protocol. On matters of protocol, that was a weak area for him. But he was very, very strong on recognizing the equality of every human being and respecting every human being. So in that spirit, you are all equally welcomed and you are all equally appreciated. It doesn't matter whether you're a board member of the Kathrada Foundation or a former MEC sitting over there, or ministers that are here, or judges that are sitting over there, or pensioners who are standing over here. All of you are welcome, young and old, men and women. We're all very, very welcome, and we really appreciate that you're here. But a special, special word of welcome to Judge Albie Sachs. I called him Judge early on. Yes, just give everybody a round. And he nearly bit my head off. He said, have you forgotten my name? I have a name. My name is Albie. My mother called me Albie. That's not actually his full name, but I'm not here to introduce the speaker or introduce the discussant, if you like. We've got somebody else who will do that. But a very warm welcome, and we're really honored to have you as our invited speaker. I haven't seen Nomboniso Gaza, who is our respondent this evening, but because I follow her on Twitter, I know that she's coming tonight. So she must be delayed in that rush in Johannesburg, for everyone trying to get here. So Nomboniso is going to be, in her own words, she's labeled as the respondent, but knowing Nomboniso, she will never just be a passive respondent. And what she said on Twitter today is that she is going to be a participant in a conversation with Albie on very important matters. So, as I said, Comrade Prema Naidu will do the introductions in a moment. From our side, we can say this has been the 10th annual lecture. We've had some very distinguished people present this annual lecture. And to go through the list, started off with Kgalema Motlanthe, who is today a board member of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. It was David Makura, the Premier, now Premier of Gauteng, Trevor Manuel, Navi Pillay, Trudy Madonsela, Adam Habib, Judith February, help me, Trevor Manuel, help me, I've mentioned that already, Praveen Gordon, and finally, there's somebody called Cyril Ramaphosa. You'll have heard of him as well, I'm sure. President now, but he wasn't president then. That was early days. He was then the chairperson of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation board. So we gave him the platform, and look where he is now. So Albie, big things coming up for you. I know you've kind of retired as judge, but there are obviously bigger things ahead for you. So we really are truly honored to have Albie Sachs here tonight with us. You'll hear more of him from Prema in a moment, but we are truly honored for him to share some of his views and his insights on what is happening in our country today. We are struggling with a number of issues. We're in the face of these big challenges. What do we do? How do we understand them? And I'm sure he'll help us get a better understanding of the challenges facing our nation, the challenges that we're grappling with together as a nation. So the topic is, for a nation to live, the tribe must die. Now, I'm sure that between Albie and Nomboniso, they'll give us a better understanding of what we mean by nation, and I'm sure they'll help us really understand better what we mean, what in our context, in our South Africa, in our times, when we say the tribe must die, what are we talking about? Because I think we're all faced with this big challenge of getting ourselves out of a bad situation. That's where we are. That's the space that we're in. And I think the big, for us collectively, all of us sitting here, and for millions of other South Africans, we know we can be in a better space. We know that we want to be in a better space, but we're grappling with what exactly do we need to do to get into that better space. You'll see there the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation speaks about its main slogan, its main reason for existence is to deepen non-racialism. Big question is, what we've seen in the last couple of years, are we on the right path towards deepening, towards achieving the non-racial society that was so loudly called for at the Kliptown Conference in 1955, at the Kliptown Gathering, where there was a loud call for the freedoms of our people, a loud call for a South Africa that belongs to all, a loud call for a non-racial society. Are we on the road? And if not, what is it? What are the problems, and what do we need to do to get firmly on that road? So we're sure that Albie and Nomboniso will help stimulate us, will inspire us. Albie, incidentally, was at that Congress of the People in Kliptown. And of course, Ahmed Kathrada himself was at that Congress of the People, and some of you sitting here, the stalwarts and veterans, were also at that Congress of the People at Kliptown. So, we come with such a rich history. We come with these lofty ideals, beautiful ideals. And I think the big challenge that we're facing together and grappling with together is, what do we need to do to achieve those ideals? As Sean has already said, today marks exactly 30 years since the release of the Rivonia Trialists, but today we're also still celebrating what would have been Uncle Kathy's 90th birthday year. And so it's a big occasion, and we who are all admirers of the Rivonia Trialists, all of them, and we who are doing things in the name of Kathy, Uncle Kathy, Ahmed Kathrada, we are seeking inspiration. We are seeking, ideas to channel our activities, our actions, so that our actions get us right back on the right road. So with those few words, you're really very welcome. We're looking forward to audience participation. I hope Nomboniso is here by now, but if she isn't, the audience will make up for Nomboniso's absence. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Derek. maybe at some point you will share with people why your ankle is broken and what dents you couldn't get right as you left Parliament. So we wanted to share with all of you today just some clips to jog your memory. 30 years ago, the release of the trialists, but also the rally that took place at Soccer City 2 weeks after that, the 15th. And just some words from Kathy that I think are appropriate on the issue of the lecture today. Daud?
Comrades, in my last public speech in 1962, before a gathering of the University of Witwatersrand students, I showed them a handful of bones which I had brought back with me from the Auschwitz concentration camp. These bones were the remains of human beings, innocent human beings who had been gassed to death by Hitler for the simple fact that they were Jews or they were communists. And these bones were strewn on the streets of Auschwitz concentration camp. I brought back these bones to South Africa as a constant reminder to me and to my fellow South Africans of the evils of racialism, which dominates every aspect of South African life. Many years ago on Robben Island, I read a little poem by a lady by the name of Ainkie Kroch. She was a 17-year-old girl doing her matric at Kronstadt High School. The poem impressed me very much, and I made a note of that poem. Now I'm only going to read 2 lines of the poem to you. She says, "Build me a land where skin color does not count, where no goat face." Now if you remember, goat face was the late Albert Herzog. Where no goat face in Parliament can keep things permanently for crumb. Where black and white, hand in hand, can bring peace and love in my land. Comrades, I want to end now on this question of minority rights by telling you of a little bit of my experience on Robben Island. On Robben Island for 26 years, according to the racial categorization of the Population Registration Act, there were the so-called Africans, the so-called Indians, and the so-called Coloreds. Now, the Indians and Coloreds were always in a minority. But I want to tell you that not for a single day have we ever felt, we as Coloreds or Indians, the necessity to preserve our separate identities as Coloreds or Indians. And never for one moment have we ever felt threatened because we were living as a small minority among African people. There was no necessity. There was no necessity for us to think of ourselves as Indians or colors or Africans. We were fellow human beings, fellow oppressed people, fellow prisoners who were jointly fighting the oppressors of this country. I want to say that we must build this country because Robben Island represents a microcosm of the whole of South Africa. And I want to say that as we united on Robben Island and faced the enemy there, so we must unite in the rest of South Africa and face our enemy here as a united, non-racial people. Only there will our victory be guaranteed. Amadla. A number of us who were arrested in July 1963 had been underground, and unknown to us, the police had by that time found out about the hiding place, and they pounced on us and arrested us. From that word go, their message to us is, you are going to die. We met the lawyers for the first time, and they told us to prepare for the worst. The fear already starts the day of the arrest, because what we were arrested for already provided for the death sentence. So the fear starts there already. But in your isolation, that fear comes back. A whole passage was set aside just for 5 of us. There was a warder on duty day and night, so we couldn't talk to each other. We were in complete isolation. But then one day, while we were walking, so-called exercise, and they brought the other detainees with us, one of them mentioned to, or whispered to Governor Mbeki, that Look Smart has been killed, tortured to death. So you have more sleepless nights, you know. Is this what's going to happen to me? I can think back of the words of one of the Indian Congress leaders called Subhas Chandra Bose. And he said, if you want to enjoy the beauty of the dawn, you've got to live through the dark hours of the night. If you want to enjoy the beauty of the full-blown rose, you have to accept the thorns. I can't immediately remember others, but it went on and on in that vein. In other words, freedom to be achieved has to be fought for, has to be sacrificed. There has to be sacrifices. Freedom you don't get on a platter. Nobody has given freedom on a platter to anybody. It has to be fought for. Freedom is a very powerful weapon, you can say. The thought of freedom can never ever be suppressed. So it happens in jail as well. They could handle us physically, they could do anything they like. They could not stop us from thinking. You can be locked up in your little cell, but your thoughts go well beyond the confines of those doors and grills.
The second clip is courtesy of Video Vision, done specially for today's event. The foundation annually runs an essay writing competition, an anti-racism essay writing competition. Last year we had over 1,000 participants. This year 300. Qualitatively much, much different. The quality of the essays of young people today was just outstanding. I had hoped that MEC Panyaza Lesufi was going to be here because he had indicated to me that he was. I wanted to hand over to him just the essays that young people wrote about their experiences in schools today as one of the topics. But let me hand over to Busi Nkosi, our Program Manager, Anti-Racism. Busi has been running this program. She is spearheading the formation or the rebuilding of the Anti-Racism Network. And soon next year we'll introduce signage to replace the old apartheid signboards because those have gone. Nothing has come into their place. For the last year, Busi has been working with designers on what we would be calling post-apartheid signage, which simply says every space here is open to everybody, irrespective of nationality, race, color, or creed. So you can't be kicked out on the basis of those things. But Busi, please come and tell people what you've been doing and talk to us about the anti-racism essay writing competition. Busi Nkosi.
Good evening. I think Mr. Bolton has said a lot with regards to the essay writing competition. This has been the third annual essay writing competition that targeted young people between the ages of 15 and 25. These young people were given 4 topics to choose from, one of them being the racism in South African schools. Is it a thing of the past? Othering and belonging. Race is not real, but racism is. And hashtag Unite Against Racism, which has been our theme for this year since Anti-Racism Week. I won't delve much into the other details, but I would like to acknowledge Mahuna Muhlongo, who made it into our top 5 this year, and he's here with us today. Where are you, Mahuna? Just wave your hand. There he is, ladies and gentlemen. For this essay writing competition, we have been fortunate enough to have Creative Access Northwest, who have been our sponsors when it comes to the laptop prizes. This year, the foundation has added onto the prize that the top 3 gets, and it's not just a laptop and money, but it's also a trip to Robben Island, where they will sleep over and camp when our young leaders go at the end of November. I would also just like now to introduce to you our 3rd place winner. We will display the winner on stage, on the screen, and the name is Mbalenhle Shandu, and she is from KZN. The 2nd place winner for this competition is Carissa Chessel, and she is from Cape Town. She's coming. And the winner of this year's essay writing competition, who you are going to be fortunate enough to listen to on the screen, and he goes by the name of Jaden Ferriel, and he's also from Cape Town. Ladies and gentlemen, just listen to the young voice.
Orange, colored, erased. Could all the colored girls please raise their hands? Could all the colored girls please stand? Okay, 1, 2, 3. 3 of you, okay, you can sit down. Could all the black girls? This occurred every year without fail throughout my schooling. How could I not know I was colored? How could I not recognize that the amount of colored people in my class, year in and year out, was significantly lower than other races? I didn't quite yet know what impact my race would have on the succession of events in my life. But I stood or raised my hand whenever I needed to. I did what needed to be done. I'm still doing what needs to be done. They are uneasy, wrapped up in turmoil, difficult words that I constantly need to usher out of my mouth into a universe that is becoming unfamiliar to me, but into a universe that needs to hear it anyway. I've had to tick boxes, I have filled in several forms, I have made crosses where they needed to be. I have attempted to take ownership of my history and my stories. I have been my own voice, lost that voice, and slowly regained it. It is a constant fight, a battle. It has never been calm, but always rippled, always reminding me that it is not over, that it might never be over. Who were we before we had to tick boxes to specify our roots? Who were we before our languages started dividing us, before the clicks of our tongues became the clicks of their tongues, and gradually we became left with echoes of clicks that raised and defined us? How did we get to this point? How did we interact with each other before being given labels for our differences? I am certain that our predecessors were intellectual enough to recognize their differences, but how did that recognition impact their relations with each other? At what point did the color of my skin validate my place in South Africa? As we unpack our history and discover hidden truths about our past, a past that has systematically been positioned in the footnote of our history, I ponder on how exactly we came to this point. Race is complex as it should be because we are complex beings, but racism is systemic and systematic. Racism is exclusionary. Racism has done exactly what it has intended to: divide us. Our race is rooted in our oppression, yet we cannot deny that it constitutes a great part of our identity. There are many people that choose to identify themselves by their race before their gender or nationality. This, in and of itself, is evident of how our race is ingrained in our existence. You can attempt to ignore it for as long as possible, but there will be boxes that you will have to tick. There will be job applications that will want you to state your nationality. There will be forms that want you to state your location, because your sense of location is seemingly linked to your positionality, but also to your worth. Our roots are in African and South African soils, although our roots have a different journey. But despite the different journeys, it would be remiss of us to dictate where people belong, when all they know is where they were born. As a colored woman born in South Africa, being told in my political and international studies lecture that colored people do not belong in Africa was difficult to grapple with. How can I not belong when this is where my roots have been planted? But why have colored people been othered in a country they fought for? Why is it that colored people are being denied the very freedoms their grandparents fought for? Being colored, being a proud colored, being a proud outspoken colored, has made me understand several nuances about race, identity, social spaces, activism, and politics. It has also made me understand how the above are interlinked. I must admit that I never truly believed in the notion of racism not existing or in being colorblind. I never truly believed that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did what was best for all South Africans. I never truly believed that the end of apartheid would lead to the end of racism, because that is not how we are wired. We are not wired to forget oppression or hurt or pain. We are not wired to give the other cheek, because we actually have nothing left to give. We cannot be wired to forget about a history that has significantly contributed to our present. These are not the things I expect any South African to do, but what I do expect, at the very least, is to not have my belonging denied. I did not foresee myself having to fight for a place in a country that I was born in. But this became my reality during protests in university, where I soon realized that my struggle was not the same as other people's struggle, but also that my struggle had less gravity to it than others. I soon realized that meetings did not require my voice to be heard, that my silence was all I had. I became more aware of my positionality in the spaces I occupied, and I wrestled with what certain spaces needed from me. University taught me that not only were people obsessed with my race, but they were obsessed with telling me who I was. I needed to be black in some spaces, South African in others, African in most, but hardly what I was, what I am, colored. I was constantly being told who I was and where I belonged without being consulted first. It is not just about belonging. It is about colored people having to fight to belong, post-apartheid South Africa. It is about the fact that colored people need to have struggle receipts in order to have a seat at the table they helped build. There's this constant need to build or break, but essentially to actively do something about our situations in any capacity. Many, but not enough people, have changed their social media profiles to orange in order to show their solidarity with the turmoil our people are faced with. 43 deaths were recorded in Philippi, Steenberg, and Delft on the weekend of the 13th of July 2019. These are dominantly colored areas, and so is the Cape Flats. Yet the murder rates in these areas are increasing without serious measures being implemented by the government. Measures beyond deploying the South African National Defence Force to these areas to combat the violence. The measures that are needed should be imperative in finding the root of the problem and addressing that. But it is also telling that the location of these crimes contribute to the government's response to said crimes. These are the areas where marginalized people live, but if the crimes were committed in Camps Bay, the headlines would be different, and so with the national outcry. This is the reality of being othered. Your sense of being dictates the response or lack thereof to the infringement of your rights. It is evident that colored people have been othered based on where they live and how little social capital their roots have. I'm left with more questions than answers, which is somewhat evident of my existence. There's always been the need to debunk, to question, and to understand. There's always been an intrinsic need to know the why. It is the importance of it is the importance of not dismissing what people say, irrespective of how offensive it might be, but the need to understand what informed their rights. That is where we should begin. There are difficult questions that need to be asked. There are offensive answers that will be heard. There's a history that needs to be written. Today, I choose to be the author of mine.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a youth voice. So I think I just need to explain why these young people aren't yet this evening. As I said before, these young people will be joining the youth of the Kathrada Foundation at the end of November and will go through a program on Robben Island. And fortunately enough, they'll also sleep on the island. So, and now, today, the lecture has taken place on a weekday, which would have made it a bit difficult for them as students as well. So, apologies for that. And ladies and gentlemen, if you want to see or hear the youth voice of the top 5, feel free to go to the Foundation's website page, and you'll be able to see the video clips, but also you'll be able to read every single essay that has been submitted this year. I thank you.
So that's some of the youth work that we do. But let me call a very youthful, but not so young Prema Naidu to come and introduce Albie and Nomboniso, and thereafter we'll call them to the stage. Prema, it gives us great privilege for you to come and do the introductions today. Prema Naidu.
When Sean asked me to do the introduction, and I said, Sean, I am a retired politician. I mean, why me? There are other members of the board like Mandla and Ishmael and others. Why don't you ask them? And he said, no, we need you to do it. So I'm here. Judge Albie Sachs, our keynote speaker for this evening, Nombonisa Gaza, our respondent, welcome to this evening. Our chairperson of the board, Derek Hanekom, other members of the board who are here today, Mandla Konfi, Ishmael Vadi, as he was introduced as a former MEC for transport. And I don't know if Zarina is around, there are other members of the board who are here. I greet you all. Judge Albie Sachs, Comrade Albie Sachs, what I would prefer to call. His career in human rights activism started at the age of 17, when as a second-year law student at the University of Cape Town, he took part in a defiance of unjust laws campaign. The bulk of his work involved defending people charged under racist statutes and repressive security laws. He himself was raided by the security police, subject to banning orders, restrictions to his movement, and eventually placed in solitary confinement without trial for 2 prolonged periods. In 1966, he went into exile. In 1988, he was blown up by a bomb placed in his car in Maputo by the security agents of South Africa, losing an arm and the sight of an eye. During the 1980s, working closely with Oliver Tambo, leader of the ANC in exile, he helped draft the Constitution's Code of Conduct as well as his statutes. After recovering from his bomb, he devoted himself full-time to the preparation for a new democratic constitution for South Africa. In 1990, he returned home as a member of the Constitutional Committee and the National Executive Committee of the ANC, and took an active part in the negotiating which led to South Africa becoming a constitutional democracy. After the first democratic elections in 1994, he was appointed by President Nelson Mandela to serve on the newly established Constitutional Court. In addition to his work on the court, he has traveled to many countries, sharing South Africa's experience in healing our society. Comrade Albie, as our chairperson Derek Hanegom said, we are living in trying times. And we hope that some of your input will begin to guide us on what we need to do is to fix our troubled country. Our respondent today is Nombaniso Gaza. She is a researcher, writer, and analyst in gender politics, land, environment, and cultural issues. Gaza has been a political activist since the age of 14, when a campaign against discrimination in a Transkei school led to a detention by security police and the assault in which a jaw and back were broken with the butt of a rifle. That experience opened our eyes to other violations taking place in South Africa at the time, notably forced removals, which pushed people from the cities to the Bantustan reserves under imposed ethnic and linguistic identities. A focus on gender politics, environment, land, and cultural issues bring together multiple ways in which poverty, gender, and locations are intertwined in South Africa and the world. Gaza has published and delivered lectures on all these issues in academia, cultural publication, and conventional media, locally and international. In 2007, she contributed to and edited Women in South African History, published by the HSRC Press. She is an adjacent professor at public law at the University of Cape Town. I hope that Comrade Nombaniso will also give us an indication on what we need to be done to begin to start fixing our troubled country. Thank you very much, and can I call upon Comrade Albie and Nombaniso to take the stage, please.
So, ladies and gentlemen, over to Comrade Albie. The floor is yours.
And I'm going to start a little bit unusually. I'm going to speak about the person who introduced me, Prema Naidu. And I know it's a Kathrada anniversary and lecture and so on. But the connection, the Naidu connection in relation to Mozambique is quite profound. Idris Naidu, Prema's brother,
claims that the bomb that was put in Comrade Albie's car was actually meant for him. And I say, no, Andrews, that was my bomb, not your bomb. And in the year 2002, I'm now Justice Albie Sachs, we have a conference. It was the year of when Johannesburg hosted the Earth Summit, and the Constitutional Court is about to be constructed, where it's now on Constitution Hill. We have about 20 judges from all over Africa to deal with the theme of sustainable development. And I ask my friend, my dear close friend, Indris Naidu, to take us to the site and to recall the meaning of that number 4 prison. And he tells us a story about his grandfather, who happened to be Prema's grandfather, Shanti Naidu's grandfather, Ramli Naidu's grandfather. Was locked up with M.K. Gandhi in 1914 in that prison. They were defying the unjust laws of those days. And as soon as they arrived at the prison, the warders, the white warders, ordered them to wear the same caps that the black African prisoners are wearing. And Indra says, my grandfather said, I'm not going to wear those caps. They want to humiliate us like they humiliate the black prisoners. And Gandhi says, no. If we want to understand what life is like for the most humble in our society, we must experience life as they experience. And we will wear those caps. And we will wear those caps with pride. And Grandpa Naidu, then the young man who was actually adopted by Gandhi, said we wore those caps, we wore them with pride. And when Gandhi went to India later that year to lead or become one of the leaders of the independence struggle, he took that cap with him. So the cap that had been obligatory wear for black African prisoners in number 4 prison on what's now Constitution Hill was known as the Gandhi cap, became the symbol of the Indian independence struggle. Here, from here in Johannesburg. And it was Grandpa Naidu who told that story, who was part of that whole tradition. And it's a tradition that is such a powerful theme in the life of our nation. I grew up, it was an H.A. Naidu, I don't think he was closely related, married my mother's friend born in Potbury. And then afterwards, Yusuf Dadu was that great figure from the Indian community at a time when the hatred of Indians was so profound in this country, cover up your black kuli eti land. It was vicious, it was nasty, and it was a time when I got to meet Ahmed Kathrada, that second-year law student who'd taken part in the Defiance of Unjust Laws campaign. I come to Johannesburg. It was lovely seeing my cousins and aunties and uncles and so on, but the highlight of the trip was Colvert House. And the two strong leaders then, Ahmed Kathrada and Barney Desai, they were great friends. They separated a bit politically afterwards. And I loved going there. They loved me to come. The first time I came, I disappointed them bitterly. Not them, but some other people there. They wanted to know if I'd buy them some brandy. But being the Puritan that I was, I felt there's too much liquor in the struggle, the movement. I disappointed them. But I must have passed a political test because I was invited to come again. And we were thinking and talking and dreaming revolution, change, transformation in the world. In those days, in the early 50s, the whole of Africa was painted either green for French colonies or red or pink for British colonies. There were struggles in Indonesia, in Indochina, and we had this little group, young people, Transvaal Indian Youth Congress, and I loved the energy there. And I would report back to the comrades in Cape Town. It was like I've now been in touch with these leading revolutionaries in Johannesburg, and I'm spreading the message. And Kathy then wasn't the Kathrada that we know, Uncle Kathy. He wasn't Uncle Kathy at all. He was a firebrand, big mop of hair, shining eyes. But that passion that he had, the idealism, the integrity, he changed physically. All of us changed to some extent in terms of our views about revolution and change and structural society. But that core flame inside, that belief in human emancipation, love for humanity, that intense humanity. For some people, politics extrudes their humanity. It pushes it out. It's as though you can't make omelets without breaking eggs. End justifies the mean. And for other people, the struggle being in action intensifies humanity, your concern, your connection with other people. So, through you, Prema, my love for your late brother Indris. We were three musketeers in Mozambique. It was Alpheus Mangezi and Indris Naidu and Albie Sachs. We did so much together. We shared so much together. My story today, if you like, the formal beginning of the Kathrada lecture, starts at UWC. It's in April 1990. The room is crowded, the Great Hall. It was the first Congress in South Africa, or great coming together of people from the Muslim community. And I'd returned to Cape Town after 24 years of exile the day before. I climbed Table Mountain. All those years of exile, I dreamed when I come back, I'm climbing Table Mountain. If it's raining, if there's lightning and thunder, I'm climbing Table Mountain. Can I do it? And I went up the back way. There's a road over the top past the reservoirs, down Camps Bay side to Kloof Neck. I could do it. I could do it. And Dalla Omar, who was my host, was really cross with me because I was an hour late for a meeting. For him, that meeting was more important than the dream I'd had for 24 years. Any event, I wouldn't say it's his revenge. The next day he says, come on, Albie, come with me. He drives me to UWC, puts me on the stage and tells me, this is the Muslim community of South Africa, from all over the country. Say something. I'm not Muslim. I'm not religious. When I left UWC, it was Bush College. I wasn't there for all the huge transformations, but he says, say something. And I say something with a certain measure of confidence, of comfort, that I feel useful to share. And it was something that had been based on my 11 years in Mozambique. Lessons from Mozambique. Beautiful lessons, painful lessons, dramatic lessons, funny lessons. "11 years exiled in London." I would tell people, in England, even when I was happy, I was unhappy. I felt in exile. I had books published. I got a PhD. 2 children. I felt dislocated. And We would have ANC meetings. Next week, a statue of Oliver Tambo is going to be unveiled in the borough where he lived. And it takes me back to the ANC meetings we used to have in London. The Denotes, the Paul Joseph, the various comrades who'd arrived in different ways. And now, comrades, we will sing the national anthem. And usually it would be a Labour Party hall, not very well appointed, with some broken windows, wooden chairs, not soft chairs like this. We'd stand up, clunk, 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 clunk. And now, comrades, we will sing the national anthem. And everybody would raise their right arm. Rosie Sekoleli. And my arm wouldn't go up. This arm. I had a long arm then, a full arm. It wouldn't go up. It's though my arm had a mind of its own. And it was, in a sense, the defeat of having left the country, the defeat of 2 spells in solitary confinement, with some torture by sleep deprivation the second time, the defeat that our comrades, our movement had been shattered, the underground to which I belonged, dispersed. My arm just wouldn't go up. In 1976, during a long summer break at the University of Southampton, where I'm lecturing, I go to Dar es Salaam. Terrific time to be there. Julius Nyerere, Ujama, intellectuals from all over the world, the University of Dar es Salaam. And I teach a term. We take the Tazara Railway, just been opened, up to Zambia. And then I fly to Maputo. At the airport it says, liberated zone in Portuguese of humanity. I see a soldier standing there, black African soldier with a gun, and I feel, yes, 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 a gun on our side. And a few days later, I'm at the Mashava football stadium, 60,000 people. It was the day of the launching of the armed struggle in September. 60,000 people, and people I'm with says, there's some more, and I'm looking and I see kind of little guy, simple army fatigues, and he goes to the microphone. Viva o povo de Maputo, long live the people united from Removal to Maputo. And 60,000 arms go up into the air, including my arm. I got my courage back. The Mozambican revolution gave me my courage back. Spontaneously, this stupid, defiant little arm with a mind of its own just went up into the air. And I decided that's where I want to be. And a year later, I'm now professor of law at Guatemala University, People's Republic of Mozambique. I remember very early soon after I got there, we were staying up on the hill near the university, and we told, they have a thing called Red Sunday. On Sunday mornings, the corporants, people from all over the world who come to support the Mozambican revolution, engage in voluntary activities, sweeping up, cleaning up, planting lettuce, and there's going to be a clean-up at the docks. And I'm excited. This is not London. This is the world revolutionary process, and I go down the hill and I'm wandering and I'm lost and I don't know where to go and I can't speak Portuguese, but it's like in a movie. You're wandering in a dream world, but excitement, you're lofted by your excitement, and eventually I find the docks, and by the time I get there, they finish the sweeping up. And there's an African dock worker who's addressing everybody there, maybe 100 people from different parts of the world. And he asks, what countries are you from? Here we go again. I'm from but, and then somebody says, from England, applause. From Italy, everybody smiles. I don't know why they should smile. Italy, they smile. Canada, applause. United States, very serious applause. What should I do? Should I pretend I'm English? Brazil, smiles again, big smiles. Everybody likes Brazil. Chile, very, very serious. I put up my arm, I had a right arm then. Africa do Sul, South Africa. Viva o povo unido de Africa do Sul. Long live the just struggle of the people of South Africa. Straight away, immediately. I felt so ashamed of even having been timid. You are welcome to the struggle. You've come here, you're participating. And what amused me was I had to rush to sweep a few things just in time before they ended. And then they dish out some oranges. We've cleaned up everything. People eat the oranges, they leave the orange peels where they've tidied up. So we left a bigger mess than before we began. But the train takes us back and everybody's singing revolutionary songs from all over the world. And it was an exalting moment for me. I'm sure all of us who are older here dreamt of revolution and revolution in South Africa. And then you have your concerns and fears and things are not working out in different parts of the world. And the Soviet Union and China are fighting each other. And there are all sorts of problems and revelations about murder by Stalin. But it's working in Africa. I'm going to mention two individuals who had a big impact on me in different ways. Samora Machel, the president, and Malangatana, the painter. Samora was a very, very strong figure. He established the mode of a president who sings and moves. Not quite the traditional ANC style, but picked up and becoming part of certain ANC's leader style in Mozambique. And we were hearing about the ways he would explain things. It was revolution expressed in African terms. He would say, to know the taste of an avocado pear, you must cut it in half. It's painful. Let the contradictions come out. And then you deal with the contradictions and you end up more powerful because you've resolved them, you haven't hidden them. And there were severe contradictions in Frelimo fighting for freedom. After Eduardo Mondlane was assassinated by the Portuguese Peter, but using agents inside Frelimo. Disagreement. What to do about captured Portuguese soldiers. And the people whom they called the reactionaries in Frelimo said they came to kill us, we kill them. We're short of food, we have to move around, we can't waste our time looking after them. And Samora and Marcelino dos Santos, the others said no. These are children of peasants in Portugal, sent to fight a colonial war. We would treat them with dignity and they will become the best ambassadors for Frelimo because they will understand we are not terrorists, we are human beings fighting for the freedom of our country. Issue number one. Issue number two, Josina Machel wants to carry a gun. She wants to fight. And the traditionalists say no. In our African culture, the men do the fighting and the women look after the men. What will people think of us if we're giving guns to women? And Josina insists, and she gets the backing of Samora, the progressives. The women's detachment is formed. They don't just carry messages and do propaganda work, they fight. A third issue, the global one, is who is the enemy? And the reactionaries inside Frelimo are saying it's the whites and the coloureds and the Indians. People are not African. They're the enemy. And that's partly to get at Eduardo Mondlane, who's married to an American woman, white woman. It's partly to get at Marcelino dos Santos, of mixed descent. But it's partly a whole philosophy. It split Frelimo right down the middle. And ironically, those who were the reactionaries, who were anti-white, many of them went over to the Portuguese afterwards and actually fought against the freedom struggle. Anyway, we're hearing these stories. And we would love to be told on a Saturday afternoon there'll be a meeting in the town square below the city hall. Thousands of us would go there. It was a joy and a pleasure to hear Samora. He would sing, he would talk. It wasn't a rant. It wasn't a heavy ideological presentation. It was picking up ideas, communicating with the people. He would say, there are some people who believe it's terrible to be eaten by a foreign tiger, but they're very happy to be devoured by a local lion. Local oppressors. He said there's some people in neighboring countries who are very proud that they were oppressed by the British and not by the Portuguese. They had a superior class of oppressor. And he made the statement, for the nation to live, the tribe must die. It's vivid, it's powerful, it's strong. It was right and it was wrong. It was right and it was wrong. But we had to learn that. And I was captivated by that notion. It fitted in very neatly and easily with our struggle against the Bantustans, against divide and rule, the ANC being formed precisely to bring the people together, to get beyond tribalism and create the notion of an African nation, African National Congress. And we're captivated by it. But this is where I want to bring Malangatana in. Malangatana became a national hero. He was a painter. He had the prestige that a football star might have or a captain of a rugby team might have in South Africa. Self-taught, from a very poor family, whose father had gone to work on the mines in South Africa, never returned, brought up by his grandmother. And he joins Frelimo, and he's amongst a group of intellectuals who are thrown into prison. And then a very clever prison governor sees that he's a good painter and gives him canvas, and he paints. And the Portuguese say, you see, we treat our prisoners very well, and he's taken to Portugal. Now he's still Mozambique's #1 painter, but Samora's cross with him. And he's saying, if you look at my pictures, you'll see they're pictures of people in revolt and angry. I wasn't just painting beautiful scenes of this tropical, beautiful luso-tropical world. In any event, he's sent up to Nampula province. It's a kind of a, not quite a punishment, but it's a kind of correction thing, to be in charge of culture there. And I meet him there, and he's shaking his head. He said, we're going too fast. We're going too fast. People want me to paint happiness and joy. There's still a lot of pain in our society amongst our people. I wanted him to paint happiness and joy. I was feeling joy. The revolution, viva, it's working, it's uniting people. I thought, well, he's quiet, he's slow. And then one example that I heard about, they're opening up schools in areas where people never had literacy at all. And they're opening up schools in Niassa province, which for some historical reason nobody could explain to me, became a Muslim influenced province. 90% of people there are Muslim. And they want to feed the kids at school. And the cheapest way of providing protein is cultivating, growing pigs. This is the revolution. We are workers and peasants. We're uniting to destroy imperialism, create independence. We're not going to allow these taboos, obscurantismo, to stand in the way. And Mangatana's feeling it's disrespectful. You're losing touch with the people. It wasn't difficult getting the destruction of the traditional authorities because they'd been so involved in the Portuguese colonial system. They were the main recruiters for the mines. They were the ones who compelled people to produce quantities of cotton at very reduced prices. They were part and parcel of the colonial apparatus in a very direct sense. So when the colonial apparatus disappeared, they disappeared with them. They had almost no authentic popular support. But it wasn't as though the new authorities put in their place were functioning, were working well. Some years pass. We feel it, the Matola raid. Just after Ronald Reagan is become President of America, a week later, South African commandos come into Maputo, Matola. I think 8 of our people are killed. 2 years later, Ruth First, blown up. So that revolution that was so inspiring now becomes associated also with death. I had somebody whom I'd loved very, very, very much, and she was a Portuguese person, grown up in Mozambique, and she said there's somebody else in her life, and it turned out it was an MK comrade whom she had been giving a safe house to, and she really, really, really loved this guy. And she said, you know, Albie, it's so strange in MK. You have the best and you have the worst. She said, there's nothing in between. And Chris, that was the name he had, was the man she loved. And I had to get over the rupture of what I'd been hoping for. And a couple of years pass and I get a message. Chris was ambushed in Swaziland. The car was set alight. He was very cruelly killed. Your friend is prostrate. Can you go and help her? And I go to the house where I'd been before in different circumstances. She's lying inert in the bed. And I lie down next to her and she starts screaming and she's scratching me. Why did it have to be Chris? Why couldn't it be you? Why couldn't it be me? Why? She says to me, and I understand what she's saying. And what am I giving her? I'm giving her the chance to scratch me, to express her grief. And we're hearing the rumbles of war from across the bay. And before we used to go out in July, which would be the end of their year vacation time, before the Portuguese would go to the Estoril and come back and tell stories with whom they met on the Estoril in Lisbon. Now the students and the staff and the technicians would go to get to know their country, to work with the peasants in the rural areas. Get to know the rivers and the mountains. Get to know your country, the crops. Mozambicanize, that term is used all the time. Not Africanize, Mozambicanize. Because Portugal was saying Mozambique was an extension of Portugal. And Mozambique contains people who'd been divided into native tribes and groups, the indigenous, and the Portuguese had a small selection of assimilated black Mozambicans to project the vision of a non-racial society, and much more brutal labor conditions in the rural areas than we had in South Africa. And we couldn't travel anymore to do this research. And Ruth First, who was organizing it, the Centre for African Studies, is killed by a bomb sent from South Africa. We weep, we go to the burial ground in Maputo. Every December 16th, we would go there, clean the graves, sing revolutionary songs, and wonder there's a bit of space there. Who would be next? Who would be next? And the Civil War, and the black market, and the deprivations, the convulsion, and Frelimo losing its elan, the Nkomati Accord, very, very harsh on ANC, understandable, but the way it was projected as a victory was very painful. Our people went to the plains singing freedom songs defiantly. And I still remember that moment when Marcelino dos Santos gave a medal to Samora Machel, and Samora gave a medal to Marcelino dos Santos, and I thought, I hope we never, never, never reach that stage in South Africa, where our leaders are giving each other medals. For the nation to live, the tribe must die. For the South African nation to live, Samora Machel died. Samora Machel died. He was on a mission to get the frontline states to step up the struggle against apartheid. That plane was brought down by a beacon. Mozambique lost its president because of the South African freedom struggle. I feel such anger, such dismay when a Mozambican is stabbed here in Johannesburg because he's from Mozambique. The bomb that was sent to kill me didn't kill me, but 2 Mozambicans walking by got the shrapnel and died afterwards. That country paid such a heavy price for our freedom. The civil war fomented by South Africa, the destruction of everything there. Millions of refugees, thousands of people I lost an arm without legs, the landmines. When I'm wheeled out after the bomb, the word was I must leave the Maputo hospital because they would poison me, the people who hadn't killed me with the bomb, to go to London. And I come to the airport and I see the spot where the soldier is standing. Not the same soldier who stood there for 11 years with a gun. And I don't feel joy. No more guns, no more guns, no more guns. And I'm thinking afterwards as I'm recovering, what do we take from Mozambique? We learned our politics not just from reading books, from studying what Lenin said or somebody writing on open society. We lived in East Germany, West Germany, we lived in Canada, we lived in Cuba, we lived all over Africa. We saw it firsthand, the one-party state in Kenya, ruthless, dominant, patriots like Wationgo thrown into jail, Odinga Odinga thrown into jail, who'd done the real fighting. And the Home Guard called the Askaris who sided with the British. They sent their children to school, university. They're now occupying positions in government, supporting Kenyatta. We saw that. We saw life in Tanzania, wonderful Julius Nyerere, but very little development, but a social cohesion that was very powerful. We saw an attempt with the revolutionary thrust to fast forward history. For the nation to live, the tribe must die. We mustn't be uncomfortable about using Portuguese. We took the language from the oppressor, we turned it into an instrument of liberation. Our freedom struggles are in Portuguese, our communication in Portuguese, songs, our constitution in Portuguese. Portuguese becomes the language of national unity. That's being projected. right and wrong. Right and wrong. Samora would send a Ronga-speaking person to be the governor in Makonde area to demonstrate anti-tribalism. It's a very powerful symbol, but it didn't work. They would have preferred somebody from the area speaking Makonde language, connected, in touch, familiar, to make the revolution not a strange thing from outside, connected with an ideology, but our people, like Samora himself, using the language of revolution in very meaningful ways. We learned that. For me, the biggest thing I learned, this is now Albie, we thought hard, we fought, we argued over ideas. I learnt about pluralism. Pluralism. The hard way. Went up with the revolution, came down with the revolution. And if there's no space for opposition, it doesn't go away. It goes underground. It gets picked up by foreign forces. Smith, United States, South Africa, apartheid South Africa. If you can't resolve your disputes, political disputes, through democratic means, you do it with guns. So we, the people, seize power with guns. The enemy use guns to destroy the people. Mozambicans fighting Mozambicans. The country is convulsed. There's hunger. Child soldiers, landmines. When I came back to South Africa afterwards, all my comrades here were saying, what's the matter with you guys? We've been waiting for the revolution, we're ready to go, and now you say we must negotiate. And I feel I'm so pleased we're negotiating. And when I look at our problems today in South Africa, I locate them not simply in terms of a vision that we had once upon a time, or even the hopes that we had at a certain time. I locate them in the experience we had in newly independent African countries and other parts of the world. And I feel proud. We've had 6 democratic elections in this country, free and fair. We take it for granted. They used to say, one man, one vote once. Africa's not ready for democracy. It took us, I don't know what the us is, 1,000 years to get democracy. I couldn't help thinking democracy, concentration camps, bombing, 2 world wars. Democracy is not for Africa. And we've had 6 elections. We have a lively, open press. We have a strong judiciary. We have strong civil society. I can say what I like. My only worry is I mustn't let down my colleagues on the bench and say something that can be used against the judiciary. In the old days, if you saw somebody taking notes, it wasn't because they're interested in what you're saying, special branch, security police. We're a free, open, democratic society. It's a huge achievement. And our president stepped down not because tanks go into the streets or 1 million people go into the square, but because there's been a democratic vote to bring them down. It's an enormous achievement. And it's an achievement that enables us to make other achievements. And let me just conclude then with the other lessons that we learned. That's the huge one for me. And also the rule of law. I'm not a lawyer's lawyer. Everything under apartheid was done through law. It was ruled by law. It was awful. But I saw in Mozambique, if somebody got locked up, there was no mechanism. Your husband, your wife, your son, your neighbor. You had to know somebody in the police force. The rule of law wasn't important just for the wealthy, the powerful. Nobody was wealthy then, some people were powerful. The rule of law was necessary for the poor. For the poor. They needed it more. The rich didn't need it. They had money. They had contacts. So late, relatively late in life, I become a convert to the rule of law because of the Mozambican experience. On language, when it came to negotiations at Kempton Park, it's Baleka and myself, we go, and there's a huge array of professors, and even Neil Barnard, head of security, are there, because that's make or break for de Klerk. If Afrikaans is destroyed, if English becomes the official language of South Africa, there'll be a rebellion amongst white Afrikaners. But we'd learnt in Tanzania, Kiswahili, given equal status to English. In Mozambique, the importance of multilingualism. Now, I'm a unilingual person, and I speak some Portuguese and I understand Afrikaans. I can't even say greetings in isiZulu. And maybe because of my own deficiencies, I'm aware of the importance of multilingualism. And I got heavily involved in that whole early section of the Constitution. In a sense, all language rights are rights against English. English doesn't need rights, it's so powerful and dominant. So you carve out space to prevent the hegemony. It's useful, it's used, I'm speaking to you in English. It's not a question of being anti-English. But in terms of status, the theme was accepted here, the parity of esteem of all the 11 official languages. And not only that, we have communities for whom language is important. And I was thinking very much of people like Indris and Bobby Pillay, who's in exile with me as well. And Gujarati is in our constitution, Telugu is in our constitution, Tamil. And we have an Italian community that's proud of the language, and a Greek community. We approach the French, they think they don't want to have a little subordinate space in our constitutional order. So French isn't there, German is there. And sign language, and Sanskrit, and Hebrew and Arabic, they all mentioned. It's all part of that getting beyond for the nation to live, the tribe must die. You don't eliminate all the cultural features. We have customary law is recognized as an original source of law in South Africa. But, the very big but, and it's, I think, a unique but, subject to the principles of equality. So we developed the notion of living customary law. It's not either customary law or the Constitution. For the public law to live, customary law doesn't have to die. Customary law is part of the law of the nation, but it evolves. And we fought explicitly over patriarchy, with Controlesa and others saying patriarchy is part of, intrinsic part of our indigenous culture, and the Constitutional Court said no. When it came to the preamble of the Constitution, so I'm going to end with the preamble. Another paradox. I'm asked by a top religious leader from a big church in KwaZulu-Natal province. This is 1991. Would you like to be a hero? 2 million people. All we want in the Constitution is in humble submission to Almighty God. Now, we wouldn't like to be a hero, but I grew up in a secular home. I can't honestly say that, and I fear that if you put that as the opening statement of the Constitution, and it was in the interim Constitution, it somehow provides a form of religious hegemony, if you like, of everything that follows. It's too powerful. So eventually I come up with the notion, Nkosi Sikeleli Africa. And my right arm is now going up. It's singing. And Moranabaloka Sitrabasaya, so it's 2 languages, African languages. It comes from the people. It's meaningful to the people. It's unifying to everybody. And Khotsi in Africa, and God bless Africa. That's not hegemonic, and the diversity is there. And I remember showing it to Cyril Ramaphosa, the Negotiations Commission. He's not satisfied. I want to know why. Shivenda's not there. Shitsonga's not there. So you'll see now, there's 6 languages there. And it's a religious theme. So for the nation to live, religion doesn't have to die. And multilingualism doesn't have to die. We must find South African ways of making everybody feel accommodated and comfortable, so that for the one to feel joyful and happy, it doesn't mean the other has to feel sad. So I'd like to end on a happy note, just to say that it's hugely meaningful for me to see Kathy. He hadn't done any public speaking for 26 years. He's taking it so seriously. He prepares a speech more than I've done. I've just got my notes here. He knows it's an important occasion. He knows that he made that choice himself. He almost certainly could have got off on appeal at Ravonia. The evidence against him was very, very slight. There was nothing in his handwriting about hand grenades. He just happened to be there. And the lawyers were saying, Kathy, we can get you off. And he said, no, I'm a political actor. How would it appear to the people out there that only black Africans are the ones who sent to jail? He said, no appeal. None of them appealed. And he didn't do it in a flamboyant way. We only heard about that really from the lawyers, not from him. He's not telling the story to say how great he is. That was the choice that he made. And that's something beautiful in our culture and our history. People from many different backgrounds, different modes of expression, different styles, enjoying different cuisines, but animated by this struggle for freedom, and understanding freedom is not simply getting rid of the shackles, but transforming and emancipating society. And I am proud to belong to that generation. I'm proud to feel that those of us, and I see a number sitting here in front of me, that we shared those common ideals. And also we saw things going wrong then inside our organization. This is not something new, that there's setbacks and disappointments. But what pleases me is to see those institutions we built, that constitution we made, based not simply on the idea that everybody's perfect and everybody in office will be good. On the contrary, when I gave my inaugural lecture at UCT in 1991, it opened with the phrase, "The beautiful people are not yet born," which was taken from a Zimbabwean writer, from a Ghanaian writer. And I quoted Wationgo in one of his novels from Kenya, "A rich man's fart smells sweet." Now, that's not the normal opening of an inaugural lecture. But I was saying our constitutions are built on the tension between perfectibility and corruptibility. That was in 1991. And based on our experience in Mozambique, in other African countries, inside our own organization, the torture that had been used at Quattro, the torture that we prevented from continuing through the Code of Conduct. The struggle between perfectibility and corruptibility, as far as I'm concerned, was going on all the time then. It continues today. The people who come to Kathrada Foundation, who identify with your spirit, are people also striving for the anti-corruptibility, the perfectibility, that was so much part of Kathrada's life, that we honor so much, that I think all of us here are proud to identify with. Thank you.
Nomination.
Okay, right. Good evening. As always, it is a pleasure and an honor to share this stage today with Albie. You continue to teach us, not in quoting literature and ideology, but through careful construction of what it means to struggle for our own humanity, what it means to struggle to be human beings in the fullest and best sense of the word. To struggle not because we are perfect, but because we seek that which may make us live better. Me, you, my neighbor, and everyone. Thank you. Josina, hello. I particularly single her out because that's Josina Machel, Grasa and Samora's daughter, who's named after Josina Samora's first wife. I was trying to find the poem that Samora wrote when Josina died, and I couldn't quite find it. There's something the matter with the network. But one of the lines, and he says, Josina, you are not dead. Your responsibilities and your dreams live through us. I hadn't thought, to be honest, of the Mozambican struggle when I was thinking about this talk, even though it is framed on Samora's words. I did think about those words. I did think about the context of the Mozambican struggle, but I didn't think about the multiple ways in which that struggle really tried to be humane. If you look at the progress that was done in terms of education, if you look at the progress that was done in terms of healthcare, increasing the rights of women, the first 10 years before the war really gripped the country after liberation, those years, if I look at what the Mozambicans achieved in those years with the resources that they had, and I look at what we have achieved, there's a conversation that we need to have. For me, the Mozambican struggle has always been inspiring, particularly on the struggle to be humane. You talk about Malanga Tana, the artist. I discovered when I was in Mozambique that he was also an opera singer. I could not believe it. In fact, I challenged him and then he performed in front of me. And on the day Raymond and I went to visit Malanga Tana, he was busy. It was just a few years before he died. He was busy with the kids in his barrio, teaching them to draw and to paint on the sand. It was a Saturday morning. There was something very personable, something very humane, and something, of course, very melodramatic and larger than life about Malanga Tana. But the tenderness, my God, the tenderness. And it is this tenderness, this ability to understand that my identity as a human being, my very being, is linked to yours. Albie starts his talk and talking about your own identity formation in relation to others. The things that have inspired you, whether it is from the caps that Africans wore and moved from being a source of humiliation to being a source of pride. How you change something in relation to others. Being located in Europe, in Britain, the identity that you bring that makes it uncomfortable for you to be in Britain. I've always told people that whenever I think about my own life and the different decisions that I've made, one thing I know for sure that I would have not been able to survive was exile. I'm absolutely under no illusion that I would have been able to cope with exile. I wouldn't have been. Because there's something about exile that Actor Noche writes about. He says, those roots that have sipped the waters of another continent and therefore cannot yield in the shallow lens of another. We talk about the tribe dying in order for the nation to live at a very difficult time in South Africa, but also at a very exciting time. Graça, speaking at Mistra and revisiting her own journey, reflects on this and reflects on Samora's words. And like you, Albie, and like me and many others, she in fact does acknowledge the fact that Samora was right and he was wrong. We do not have to choose between the identity as a tribal subject, if that's what you want, the religious identity that you inhabit, and that of being part of a nation state or a nation identity. Today, when we talk about identity, often we're talking from two very entrenched extremes. There are those who say that in order to build a non-racial society, you have to do away with race. That we should pronounce ourselves as race blind. That we should get to a point where race doesn't matter. And that's the only way we can build a common identity, South African identity. There are the others, particularly young people, who challenge me and sometimes turn everything that I know, who argue that there can be no non-racial project in a society that is racist. They assert their African identity, their blackness, in so strong terms that for many of us, or for someone like me who cut her teeth in the non-racial politics of the 1980s, it is disconcerting. But it is important, I think, that we try and find the conversation where many of us live, without ignoring those with whom we disagree. Firstly, I disagree that in order to build a non-racial society, that you should do away with recognizing the importance of race in society. Race is a social construct. It is artificial. We know that. But it also is material. It is material in ways that determine whether an Indian prisoner will wear shorts in jail or long pants. It is material in ways that determine whether a white prisoner will be at Robben Island or Pretoria. I'm not attaching any value to being in Pretoria Central. I'm not saying it is better, but I'm saying it was conceived as better. It was conceived as gentler. And so a whole system of prisons, system of people who have committed, in the eyes of the law, the same kind of crime against state, but they cannot be put in the room together. I think partly, and this is something that we don't often talk about, I think partly because the apartheid regime was very threatened by the idea that there were white compatriots, there were white people who were prepared to forsake every right and privilege that was given to them and tie their lot with the future and the lot of the majority of the people in this country. So it was not necessarily in service of let's say, white prisoners, but it was because in many ways the apartheid regime was embarrassed, that it wanted to hide this solidarity between these people. In according certain privileges, if you can call them privileges, and saying, white Indian prisoners can wear long pants, whereas Africans can wear long shorts. Yes, to humiliate, but also in a way to say to the Indians, you're not quite like them, remember that. So the first act of defiance was Kathy saying, no, you give them shorts, I'll take shorts. So part of the nation being born and the tribe dying, it is not about abolishing tribal or different identities that we have. It is about saying, I may be all of this, but my identity is forged in solidarity with others. That I become human because I'm part of the journey towards humanity and the journey of humanity of my brothers and sisters. I think often we forget the importance of that solidarity, the importance of those kinds of choices, and often very difficult choices that people make. We don't talk enough about family strife that was brought by some of these choices. Some people didn't speak to their families. Some people were cut off from their families. Or some communities, like the Jewish community, some pockets of the Jewish community were uncomfortable with people of Jewish descent being part of the struggle. So there are these kinds of tensions, and they are always going to exist. So when we say today we want to build a society that makes it possible for us to come together as human beings, what does it mean? Let's take race because it's an issue that everybody's talking about. Albie has talked about how what we do not agree with, we often settle through violence. And violence is very much part of this society. So we say, let's step outside, or we use the guns and we do all these kinds of things. But we've got to be very careful in terms of how we may exchange the guns to the court. The conversation about hate speech cannot in any way be an unheated conversation. And yes, we'll go to courts about this. But I think in addition to going to court to apply, whether some fringe group wants to use the South African flag, the old South African flag, I think most importantly is the recognition that these issues are not going to be resolved in court. Yes, the courts will play a role, but the material and substantive results will be through interacting with one another. So irrespective of what the court decides, even if the court says don't use the flag, it is part of hate speech, or even if it says use the flag, you have a right to use it, there's a conversation that we need to have. We cannot say the court has decided, therefore this issue is settled. If we do that, I think we're robbing ourselves of an opportunity to really have conversations that matter in this country about issues that really make us uncomfortable. And it is through that discomfort, I believe, that we might be able to grow. I, as a person, Nomboniso, I don't particularly want to have a conversation with people who want to demonstrate the South African flag. That's me. But if I think of myself as Nomboniso, who has a responsibility or who wants to make a contribution towards nation building in this country, I push myself beyond the comfortable. So I don't want to have the conversation with people who demonstrate with the old South African flag. I don't want to. I prefer not to. But if that conversation is important for the social project, if I believe that it's going to be easier for the generation of my nephew who's 12 to have better conversations in future because I went through this, I have no problems with it. And I think it is important that we look at all these identities as socially constructed, all of them. I mean, race, we know it's socially constructed. The very notion of Caucasian is part of a historical and social construct. And with time, it's taken different forms. So it is even whiteness, as we problematize it in social studies, is not a given. It is a concept that has evolved, structurally entrenched, that has evolved, as well as others that have evolved. So for white people who want to be at the highest of buildings and have the loudest microphones and shout at us, that if we want to claim that we are the children of Mandela, that we should do exactly as Mandela did, as they understand Mandela in their own terms. But we should be able to listen to them. We should be able to listen to them and say, well, firstly, let's talk about Mandela himself. That Mandela was not this flat figure who was either very good or very bad when he was a terrorist. That Mandela had so many gray areas, had so many textures, contradictions within himself, which he talked about. For example, when I read Long Walk to Freedom the first time, and read Mandela talking about the poet Mqhayi, the influence of the poet Mqhayi, and how when Mqhayi went to Fort Hare when Mandela was a student, that he felt stirred and quoted this poem. I went back and read this poem. In fact, I remember reading the book and thinking, no, but this guy was a closer chauvinist, right? And I went back and to read. Now, I don't think before I read The Long Walk to Freedom, I don't think when I read it, I had read Mqhayi for more than 15 years. I think I probably had last read him 15 years ago, or even longer than that. But in Nomboniso, the teenager, Mqhayi was amongst the poets that believed in Xhosa chauvinism. So the way he calls the Xhosa warriors, and I was like, oh, no, this is nonsense. Then I read it later, and I read Mandela citing this man. I'm like, what's wrong with this old man? Right? And I think I probably, for many years after that, I still kind of thought, Then I had to go back and read Mqhayi. And read from a different lens, from the lens of a young African man who is stirred by this man's poetry. And then began to understand that not so much chauvinism really, but more quoting and citing the history of warriors, and we do it, all of us. The same Mandela writes in The Long Walk to Freedom about these men, because the Congress, the grand narrative of the Congress struggle is this big man. This man in the Youth League, and during the Defiance campaign, and conceiving that the Defiance campaign could lead to them being jailed. And the stigma of going to prison for Africans. Because, if in African communities, Mandela writes that if people went to jail, they were considered to be tsotsis, and, there was no honor associated with going to prison. So I get irritated when I read it, and he says, to get ourselves prepared, we reminded ourselves of Gandhi's of the Satyagraha movement in 1913 and remembered that these people landed in jail. So there was no shame, and we started speaking a lot to people in the Indian Congress, he writes, who could remind us, who had more to share, so that we could do away with the stigma that was in our minds associated with jail. Of course, by then I lose it. I'm like, bloody hell. In 1913, that same year, 1913, women, African women, were arrested. They were in Bloemfontein. They were in jail. Sol Plaatje and many others begged them not to do the anti-pass demonstration in 1913. And in fact, Sol Plaatje and Abdurrahman went to visit them in jail and went through this whole trauma of these African women in jail. So I write, I've got a copy that's got all sorts of rude comments in my long walk to freedom. And I'm like, what's wrong with Mandela? I mean, why would you cite the Satyagraha movement, which is important, which you should cite, but not cite the African women's struggle? The fact that these women went to jail before you. Why don't you cite the fact that in 1864, when the first introduction of some form of identity document was given to African women, they say Futsek. Right? I mean, the part that I like most about Bloemfontein was when these women started beating the policemen with the sticks. This is 1913. And I raise this because I think if Mandela were alive today and we were to have this conversation, I think he would probably say, before I write about 1913, let's talk about, take me to those chapters, help me with that research. So none of us are finished subjects at any point in time, as individuals and as communities from which we come. So to raise this about these shortcomings of Samora is not to say that the fundamental message in this that says the tribe must die in order for the nation to survive. It's not to say that it is not important. It is important. In a country, in a continent where it had been impossible to build unity and national unity, where tribal identities were abused and often some of them constructed to undermine the national struggle, it's important to understand that these identities can be undermining to the national progress, but also they can be, and in fact they will be very important for it, because it is when we are comfortable in our other identities that we can come with people and say, this is who I am, and share in the journey towards a fuller humanity. Thank you.
Wow. No, Moniso, that wasn't me making an alarm sound for you to finish. Now, it's a time where we want you to contribute, but these are the preconditions. The lecture has been delivered. Your contribution must not equal the length of the lecture or the response. But what I do want, this is not a question and answer session. I want your thoughts on the ideas that were raised, your thoughts about building a nation in this country, what needs to be done. So there's a mic going up on this side, and there will be one on that side. You have a minute to make your contribution and then move over to somebody else. But let's take the first few hands here. Your thoughts on the lecture, the theme. What do you think needs to be done in South Africa today? Okay, nobody this side loud. Nobody wants to speak. Very good, very good. We'll be done very quickly with this meeting.
Why can't we ask questions?
No, because it's not a question and answer session. I want to know your thoughts.
Yeah, okay.
I want to know your thoughts.
I'll put it in the question form. Okay, thank you. My name is Kenny Mamasa. Quickly, since you studied Mozambique was one of the countries that was highly contaminated with anti-personal mine. That obviously was, the former anti-personal mine, what you know as landmines. I mean, Albie quoted that twice. Landmines, let me just use the word landmines. Now, in 1996, there was the treaty to ban the production, use, transfer, and stockpile of landmines was enacted. So landmines are banned, and they won't be produced again. Now, that particular treaty became a model treaty in disarmament, international disarmament. So after that, there are 4 more treaties, or 5 more treaties that came. The treaty to ban the Convention on Cluster Ammunition, which is the treaty to ban cluster bombs. Now the TPNW, the treaty to ban nuclear weapons, the Arms Trade Treaty, etc., etc. I can go on and on and on. But
No,
now,
please don't. Let's get to the conclusion.
that's what I'm coming to. That's why I don't want to continue with that. Now, South Africa was very pivotal in that treaty. And the gentleman in DERCO at the time that was really, really key to this particular international treaty was Comrade Jackie Slab. And you know what happened after that? He became Interpol person, ended up in prison, and, Now, my comment, or my question rather, is more on a writing off of our leadership. We kind of like lose continuity. I can go on and on. I can use Mugabe as an example. I can use the previous head of state. I can use so many other people in that. Because really, really, this is where my concern. Who do we ask the guidance and leadership from? If we will have these great people at the early stages of their careers, and later in their lives, they kind of like get written off.
Okay.
For right reasons or wrong reasons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we take the other contributions aside? No. You're all shy here today. Okay. Daud, let's just keep on moving. There's a hand there in front, Daud. Just here.
Hello, Evan. Speaking like as a born free, I just want to
Is that mic working?
I don't know. Is it? Oh, yeah, it is. Sorry. I just want to say that I feel like in moving forward and trying to like build a nation and stuff, the youth, personally, from personal experiences, I feel like youth tend to be disregarded when we voice our concerns about how we feel like we're still struggling, because it's like, oh no, you're born free, you don't know anything, just go to school and stuff. So it's like, I feel like if we're going to move forward, we do need to start taking in our opinions and how we view things, because as much as you guys went about it and everything, we are also living in the effects of that, and it is affecting us. And so we also need to be included in the conversation.
The inclusion of young people into this whole nation-building process, important. Just raise your hands as we go up there. Right, there's a hand there in the middle.
Good evening. Thank you for your beautiful words tonight. One of the reflections that I had was just on the words that were stated by Nomboniso. None of us are finished subjects at any point of time. Kind of this idea that we gotta be anchoring for our society with this openness of heart and mind, and the connection to the importance of relationality, and also the connection to solidarity. I think that is something that we need to discuss a lot more in South Africa. And one of the ideas that I'm kind of thinking about is, how is it that some of the folk that participated in the struggle today somehow have arguments, and when you hear them, you can't really hear them in light of solidarity today. What does it mean? We kind of celebrate the past. But I think that story of Uncle Kathy and choosing to anchor himself in the struggle with others that were struggling needs to be embraced more. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that was Seth. Right? Okay, if there's nobody else, we'll come down here. Right, there's one more in here, and then we'll come back this way. And there's one with hand in front.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Nolan. Firstly, thank you for the informative session we had today. I feel very educated. I learned a lot, so I must thank you for that. Secondly, I come from the corporate world. I used to be in the corporate world for like 30 years of my life. I decided to leave them at the end of June this year. Basically because of certain things that you guys actually mentioned today regarding humanity. In my personal opinion, humanity has been lost in a big way in the corporate world. And if we need to move forward as a country, we need to change the mindsets of individuals. That's the transformation I want to see. So, me as an individual, the reason why I left the corporate world is to pursue my passion, which is basically living and serving my purpose. And back to the young lady down here, the focus has to be on the youth, right? Because we need to change these young minds and help them develop other minds as well. So that's the transformation I want to see in the country, and this is what I believe we can use to build our nation. We change the mindset into one of gratitude, for example, humanity, respect, and watch how we will flourish. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Auntie Fatih. You're in front, Daud.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank both Comrade Albie and Comrade Nomboniso. Hi there. Long time I haven't seen you. First of all, I must say that it's been really good listening to both of you, because many of us find ourselves in a sort of a crossroads, and in a positive way, not a negative way, a positive way. My question, thank you. My question is, first of all, I'd like to thank both of you and the other people who have contributed. What I would like to know is, in terms of both your understanding of what's happened since 1994 and the problems that we are facing over a whole range of issues, where is the role of women in this country at this point in time? I think we made headway, much better headway, before 1994, during the time of CODESA and the first 10 years of our new dispensation. It hurts me and it worries me that women who played a pivotal role in the struggle for liberation in this country, and I'm talking about women across the board, white, black, green, or yellow, all women who participated. And I think to some extent, women are still the major losers of the problems in our country today. What can we do to bring them up, because they have to be stopped being seen as being on the periphery? They are part and part of the center. We need to recognize that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I take the last? Okay, there's a hand in the middle, and then we'll come to onto the right here.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Catherine Hunter. And Sean, I'd like to address head on what you said. What do we think needs to happen? But if I could just say thank you so much to the speakers. You had a very sort of unlikely take on the topic. I don't quite know what I expected, but what you provided was way, way beyond, and the thoughts will remain with me for a long time to come. One of the missing dimensions that I think we need to, as a nation, give more attention to is the tension between fear and respect, which I feel comes up, and it's not actually overtly addressed. When it comes to how do we advance the Constitution versus accommodate different religions and cultures. I hear from linguists that because the missionaries came in side by side and often, virtually the same as the colonialists, and they were responsible for transcribing African languages and translating and so on and so on. A lot of the translation was built through the lens and the mindset of the colonialists, and it was in the interests of the colonialists that the words fear and respect were conflated or blurred. And that the way it plays out in current times is, of course, where we see it in the newspapers and the cases that are coming before the courts currently all the time, that individuals who stand up and hold authorities to account are regarded as being disrespectful. Or situations where managers or seniors look at their juniors and shut them up on the basis of this thing called respect or fear. I mean, we've had people stand up and say in court that they fear their bosses. That's why they go along with corrupt behavior. So I'm just saying that in terms of how we take this particular discussion forward, I think the words fear and respect need to be untangled. Thanks.
Thank you. There was our last hand on this side. Let's just get the mic over there.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dimakato. Professor Mkai, when you were talking and you were mentioning the issue of the 1913 women's struggle, the black ones, why they were not profiled in the book, I was like, oh, August has just passed by. Where were you? But at the same time, I felt like, why do we have to micromanage the women's struggle to just a month, August? Probably, maybe that's a need for it to be profiled or opened up throughout all the months, and not just put it or micromanage it or celebrate it rather in a country to just 1 month, because for me it was more educative and more enriching to realize that within the way in which we're unpacking the struggle, there was this powerful part of the link towards undermining the armed struggle, which is one of the things that is not mostly mentioned when, as women, we deal with patriarchal issues. And therefore, I'm saying, as women, as mothers, as people who nurture the society, we need to talk more about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to close it here and just ask Nomoniso and then Albie just to share their closing remarks. Nomoniso.
Let me start with the women's struggle. I think there's a lot that we are learning about our own history, and that it's an ongoing education for all of us, and the more we learn, the more we want to know more. But I also think that generally there is a tendency to minimize or not give as much attention to women's struggles. And that's part of how patriarchy shapes. Catherine, you talked about fear. You know, the recent conversation about disciplining children is very interesting. It comes at a time when each group in South Africa, it seems to me, is very intent on saying we are different and this is how we do things. So we Africans, this is how we do things, we don't do. And then the conversation comes about disciplining children. And all of us, South Africans across the board, agree that we need to beat children. You know, it has been very interesting to see, and it reminds me of something that Albie said, or the first time I heard you say it was in the early 90s, that patriarchy is the only truly non-racial institution in South Africa. So I think that fear, whether you talk about Calvinism and the hierarchy that comes from that, or whether you talk about people who say in African culture you respect your elders and you respect and there's so much, by the way, there's so many spaces of dissent in many African cultural idioms and spaces that people never look at. So people will tell you that women don't do praise poetry at the king's crawl in African culture, but then they will not talk about the fact that women do a particular form of poetry, which is called uqabela, when they dance in the circle and really, unburden themselves. So, and I think the more conversations we have, the more actually we learn about each other, and also how similar we are. We share very specific traits in a very uncomfortable way. But so for me, the thing about disciplining children and authority was very revealing, and it reveals in terms of how we view people that are in positions that are higher in hierarchy, and how that position is taken to mean that you therefore deserves more respect, and you will give no respect, as many people, abusive people seem to think, to those who are junior to you. So, so how we understand authority and social interaction, I think it's very important. Thank you.
3 points. The first is, I didn't tell you what I told the gathering of diverse people from the Muslim community at UWC. That was meant to be the climax of my presentation. And I said the democracy we envisage, the non-racial democracy, is not made up of non-people. Non-people end up more or less in South African conditions being white English men with a crease in their trousers, speak English, good manners. That's somehow seen as the epitome of the non-racial. And that's not what we have in mind. Non-racial means you bring in what you are. You come into democracy with who you are. You come in with your beliefs, your cuisine, your ways of doing things, and you share it with others. So it was something I said. I was very thrilled when Ibrahim Rasool said it, opened his eyes. To me, it's such an obvious thing. But it's obvious after our Mozambican experience that you bring in who you are, what you are, you share it with others. And that's what non-racism is. It was revolutionary in South Africa. In a system of white supremacy, it was revolutionary, non-racial idea. But unless it's anti-racist, it becomes ballad. So we want an anti-racist, non-racism, where people share and enjoy and mingle and have multiple identities. And to a large extent, I think we've achieved an enormous progress compared to where we were. The question about the intensity with which women projected issues, having been so powerful in the first years of democracy and so weak, and I think that's absolutely true. It's partly that the African feminists who are at the core of everything got involved in government, became speakers, all sorts of different positions, and some of that fire, that energy, that contestation got diminished. But I don't know if you were in Cape Town a couple of weeks back when women went out into the streets. It was quite astonishing. It wasn't simply saying we must combat gender-based violence and so on. It was thousands, and it was young people. It was led by young people, started with university people, young women, but young men as well, and older people. And quite often demonstrations of these kinds, it would be the usual suspects, the people who've been battling over the years. This was very different. It really looked like Cape Town, with the diversity of Cape Town through the women. Women who, in that sense, were leading, just as when the women marched in 1956. And they didn't march separately as Africans, as coloreds, as Indians, and white Democrats. They just went as women. They were ahead of the men. So one felt with this gender-based violence thing, even embarrassing for Cyril Ramaphosa at this World Conference. Too bad. It's too bad. We are making our issue the number one issue in a very, very powerful way, in a way it hasn't been done in the world. I found that very, very moving. The last point is, okay, I'm going to confess, I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist. Even after I was blown up, I felt fantastic. I survived. They came for me. They tried to kill me. Fantastic. It was a joyous moment for me. But sometimes optimism is self-fulfilling, and pessimism is also self-fulfilling. And you find things to be optimistic about because they're there, not because you imagine them, want them, and they don't remove the negativity. I'm meeting so many terrific young people. Mainly, I'd say mostly, most impressive young African women in terms of their capacity to think, to express themselves, to challenge, but also to express beauty. I was at the Kgalema Motlanthe gathering in the Drakensberg last weekend. The thing I remember most was a young African woman speaking impromptu, in a poetic way, making points very similar. She's a clone, if you like, but a clone with different characteristics to Nombaniso, but with that same courage and bravura that you've got in a slightly different voice. It was terrific. And I'm finding it all over the place, in many different quarters. And something has been done right in this country. And what inspires me is their idealism, their passion. They're not saying, what's holding us back from becoming rich? What's holding us back from getting cars? It's not at that level at all. It's about being a human being. It's about emotion. It's about the quality of life. They're asking beautiful questions. And there are lots and lots and lots of people like that. And so I see that generation now with the institutions that the Constitution gives us, the protection that it gives us in all sorts of ways, the ability to speak out, the existence of bodies like this. You guys, you don't mind if I conclude with a little bit of praise for the Kathrada? Give me half an hour? No, it's at times it was very difficult. It was extremely difficult. It required real courage on your part. You really were sticking your necks out. Very critical moments. It's easier now. That particular battle, in that sense, has been won, and you played a leading role in that. But you're also playing a very, very positive role in encouraging this openness, this discussion, this debate, not simply to have a conversation, because we can have conversations forever. And if our leaders fail us, we must say so. We must say so. But also, if our leaders do wonderful things, we mustn't erase them. This has been a little bit astonishing for me, how the use of Dadu's wiped out of our history, the Helen Josephs forgotten, but Nelson Mandela, of course he wasn't infallible, of course there were things to be questioned, but he was learning all the time, and he was a terrific guy, and the world wasn't bemused by some kind of magician or some kind of publicity stunt. And we loved him because he was special in our ranks, special in the ability to project the nature of our struggle, for his humor, his attention to detail, his breadth of vision. He was marvelous. And who are erasing this magnificent black man from history? The people who want to decolonize. They're erasing one of our heroes. It's kind of weird. I don't think it's going to be as easy to erase Kathy, partly because he was never embraced in quite that same way. It's not Madiba's fault that lots of whites loved him because they saw him as Mr. Nice Guy who says we can carry on doing things the way we've done, we don't have to feel guilty, which was never what he said. I don't think Kathy is in danger of that. But I do think that we should respect, and it's funny when you use the word respect, my immediate response was the way we respected Oliver Tambo, this quiet, softly spoken person It's interesting, Nombaniso, the way his prestige is growing. It's filling that gap that the erasure of Mandela, to some extent, that needs to be filled. But it's because our people are aching for those qualities. And if those qualities are represented by those individuals largely with their frailties, with the things that had to be challenged, with the things that haven't worked out, so be it. And if somebody says Albie goes on talking for too long, so be it. Albie's going to shut up now.
I'm glad you finished when you did. I really thought you were going to go on. But this was powerful. Taking the topic and contextualize it within another revolution, drawing the parallels with this country, and bringing it back home to 2019. I think both of them really deserve your gratitude. But there's a wonderful saying, I'm not sure whether it's an original one by Kathy, but it's one that we attribute to him. The hardest thing to open is a closed mind. And Mr. Anakom, we have some gifts for your guests. And I don't know with that broken leg of yours, if you are able to come back up here and hand over this to our guests. One is a replica of the Robben Island key. I'm not sure if it actually works, but I'm told it's a replica. If you find yourself there one day, please have this with you. You could probably get out with it. Okay, hop along, Hanekom. To Nombaniso first. Nombaniso. And Derek, no, don't go, because very unusual. The recipients of the gift will now give back to the foundation. Maybe you want to say what you're handing over, Albie?
Yes, well, if anybody wants to see what I looked like after I was blown up, and to hear Zita Honwana from the marvelous Honwana family giving an interview saying, Albie's not dead. We don't know for how long he'll be not dead. Well, Albie's here, alive. There's a big section on Mozambique in here. It's called Soft Vengeance. Albie Sachs and the New South Africa. And the term soft vengeance came from Bobby Pillay, Sunny Singh, who sent me a note. I'm lying in hospital in London. Don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you. And I think we're going to cut off the arms, blind in one eye. Is that the country we want? If we get democracy, if we get freedom, that will be my soft vengeance. Roses and lilies will grow out of my arm. So that's in this story. And I've brought some copies. If people want to buy copies, they'll be outside.
Albie, while you're doing that, here's a test for you. What did Dennis Goldberg say after he was sentenced to life in prison?
He said, life, isn't life wonderful? And his mother, who was very hard of hearing, said, what? And they had to repeat to her, what her son, she didn't know whether he'd been sentenced to death or not. So it was very, very moving. So this is the same thing, but a special one with a nice cover. Sorry, this is different. This is for Oliver Tambo's centenary. a film that we made. I'm actually put down as the executive producer. I've never been executive producer before, which meant I was fighting with Connie Field in Berkeley all the time. What goes in, what doesn't go in. But a very beautifully made film. And then last year, we produced Oliver Tambo's Dream, 4 lectures that I gave for the centenary. And I brought 10 copies up here, and that they'll be on sale, but one will go to Nombaniso, and one for yourselves. So really, you know, to the Kathrada Foundation, your importance goes well beyond just the work that you're doing. You stand as a living, continuing example of the things that brought us all together over the years, and that you're decent people. You work in a decent way. You're not looking for office. You're not. No, the ambition is not personal ambition. It's not even political ambition. It's the ambition for the ideals for which we struggled. So it's a great pleasure for me to hand this over.
Thank you. You want a signed copy, of course.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Albie.
We move to just the closing session. Can I ask you just to stay 5 minutes with us? Annually, we do the Anti-Racism Award, and today is a very special award. And you will see why when Delani comes up to deal with this session. Now, Delani heads up our media liaison work. He has done the most incredible job in the last 5 or 6 years in the foundation to make sure that our voice is heard, the message goes out, not only here, but across the borders of South Africa. Delani, if you're ready, come and talk to people about what this is about. And as Delani does that, you can stay, but you're not going to be able to watch the clip that's going to be coming up. No. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, So annually, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation recognizes an individual or organization selected to receive the Anti-Racism Award. From the first recipient, Chester Missing, who is South Africa's most famous puppet to the Timol family for taking forward the inquiry into the killing of anti-apartheid activist Ahmed Timol, to teenage activist Zuleika Patel, and Constable David Mkondo. This accolade recognizes those who have taken a stance against racism. This year, we are proud to honor a group of women who stood up in solidarity to prevent the Somali-run Spaza shop on the street in Coronationville from being looted by a xenophobic mob. This was when violence, looting, and xenophobic attacks were at its highest in the province. Natalie, Elaine, Celeste, and Heidi, we call you to the stage. So this video clip will just give us a sense of the work that was done by the ladies.
5th of September, we heard Elaine running up the street screaming. We grabbed hockey sticks, broomsticks, shambox, and raced out of the house. There was a crowd coming down to loot the shop where Mo and Ziad works. We were not going to allow that because those boys are part of our community. They're from Ethiopia, but we treat them like they're our sons. They are very loyal, very respectful. We stood there waiting until the police came, and then we even gave them whistles so that if they do, the crowd does come back, then we'd be able to race back and stop whatever they were trying to do.
All right, so we've seen a little bit of the clip. If we can just have a few words from yourselves on the action that you took.
Good evening. Thank you to the Kathrada Foundation for giving us this opportunity tonight. For us, it wasn't about our shop and the people in the shop being foreigners. They were our people. So it became very personal, and because they're humans, and looking at the human factor. When I looked at the mob coming down the street, I just realized, no ways, they're not gonna attack our guys. These are not just, like I said earlier, foreigners to us. They are really our people. So we decided, no, we're gonna take matters into our own hands. Coronationville, I'm very nervous. My first time. Coronationville is a colored community, and it's a very small community, and it's predominantly senior citizens in our community. So for us to do what we had to do, we didn't see it as being courageous. For us it was, no, this is not going to happen. They're not going to hurt our guys. We moms. And we just realized we're going to step in and we're going to take matters into our own hands, and no criminal activity is going to take place at our shop, because we're going to just take over and we're going to fight for our guys. And then it started with us, and what happened and what was so awesome about our community, you won't believe it, our whole community just started coming out, and we all just stood together with our shop and our guys. And like I said earlier on, we're very humbled. To us, it wasn't really about being courageous, but it was just being human. Thank you.
No, we don't want to say anything. If you will just come to the front here. Mr. Vadi, if I can ask you to come and just give out these certificates of appreciation more than anything else. ID is not here. I think if this crippled man can stand, maybe others can do the same. So thank you. Thank you on behalf of all of us. Thank you on behalf of all progressives in this country. And may others learn from your lesson that taking on xenophobia is not only about workshops. It can be very simple actions like this, standing up at the right moment, at the right time. Thank you on behalf of all of us. So that brings us to the end. And because you've been such a good audience, there is some refreshments outside. There are a couple of upcoming events that will be screened here. Those of you who have access to big check accounts and deep wallets, the foundation would we would give you 2 of these keys for free if you were to make out your checks here today. Any contributions that you can make to keep this foundation going would be appreciated. If not here, then maybe tomorrow we can come and visit you at the office to get the checks. Thank you very much for your presence here. Thanks to our speakers, and thanks to the staff of the foundation. Thanks to Lenmed, the Kathrada Private Hospital for the catering. Thanks to Ali's sound that's been here. And thanks to all of the wonderful young people who were ushers, who were security, who were marshals, and who will now be helping to serve you outside. Thank you very much. Bye.